A desperate cry pierced the air as a tiny otter struggled against the river's merciless current. When a massive lion appeared at the water's edge, death seemed certain. But what happened in the next few moments didn't just defy nature. It rewrote the rules of the wild. No one could have predicted that a predator's most shocking act wouldn't be violence, but something that would leave the entire animal kingdom in disbelief. Once feared throughout the savannah, the aging lion now moved with a painful limp, his golden mane dulled and thinned with patches missing where battles had left their permanent mark. Each hunt had become a desperate gamble, his last 3 attempts ending in humiliating failure as younger prey easily outran him, leaving him exhausted and empty-stomached. The mighty roar that once sent animals fleeing in terror across the plains now barely echoed beyond the nearest trees, a hollow reminder of his fading power. Starvation was no longer a distant threat, but a shadow stalking him with each passing day, growing darker as his strength diminished. His ribs pressed visibly against his skin, a cruel reminder of the magnificent predator he once was. When herds would scatter at his mere silhouette on the horizon, the other lions had left him behind months ago, abandoning him without ceremony or farewell. Nature's harsh verdict on those who could no longer contribute to the pride. The females had turned away first, then the younger males, until he found himself utterly alone, a king without a kingdom. What terrified him most wasn't death itself, but the humiliation of weakness that preceded it. Each labored breath, each trembling step was an insult to the memory of his former glory. As the burning sun beat down mercilessly on his bony frame, he made a desperate decision born of primal hunger. The river territory, dangerous and unfamiliar to a creature who had always hunted the open grasslands, might offer easier prey for his diminished abilities. Perhaps there he could find smaller animals, ones that wouldn't require the speed and power he no longer possessed. With trembling muscles and fading resolve, he forced himself toward the water's edge, each step a negotiation between pride and survival. The journey that would have taken him an hour in his prime now consumed half a day, each painful mile a testament to his determination to die as he had lived. A hunter. The distant sound of rushing water called to him like a final hope, a last chance to prove that the spirit of the predator still lived within his failing body. He knew, in some deep and unspoken part of his soul, that this hunt might be his last, a final chapter in a once magnificent story. But what the old lion would find at the river wasn't prey. It was a moment that would challenge everything he knew about being a predator. A twist of fate that would redefine his legacy in ways he could never have imagined. The young otter had known nothing but joy in his short life. Born just 3 months earlier to a loving family, he spent his days sliding down muddy riverbanks, practicing his swimming technique, and learning to catch the silvery fish that darted through the clear waters. His sleek brown fur still carried the softness of youth, and his playful chirps delighted his parents and siblings as they taught him the ways of river life. Each morning, he would wake with boundless enthusiasm, eager to discover new corners of his watery kingdom and perfect the skills that would one day make him as accomplished a hunter as his father. That morning had begun like any other. The family had awakened in their cozy den, nestled into the riverbank, protected by tangled roots and carefully arranged stones. The dawn light had filtered through the entrance, painting golden patterns on the smooth walls of their home. His mother had groomed him thoroughly, despite his squirming protests that he was old enough to do it himself. Her whiskers had tickled his face as she meticulously cleaned behind his ears, a ritual that both irritated and comforted him. His father had demonstrated once again how to dive deep and stay underwater for precious extra seconds when hunting, his powerful body cutting through the water with an elegance the young otter could only dream of matching someday. His two sisters had challenged him to races across their favorite pool, letting him win just often enough to build his confidence, but still teaching him the value of persistence when he lost. The family had breakfasted together on fresh trout, caught by his father in the deep channel where the current ran strongest. The young otter had watched in admiration as his parents worked together with practiced precision, his father herding the fish toward the shallows, where his mother waited to make the final catch. Someday, he thought proudly, he would find a mate and hunt with such perfect coordination. After eating their fill, the siblings had played an elaborate game of chase through a series of underwater tunnels they had discovered the previous week, their sleek bodies twisting and turning through the labyrinth with joyful abandon. None of them had noticed the dark clouds gathering in the distant mountains, where unseasonal rains had been falling for days. None of them sensed the wall of water silently making its way downstream, gathering speed and power with each passing mile. The birds had fallen strangely quiet, and the usual chorus of frogs had ceased. But these subtle warnings went unheeded by the otter family, too absorbed in their daily routines to recognize the signs of impending danger. The flash flood struck without warning. One moment, the young otter was practicing his fishing skills in a shallow eddy, concentrating intently on a small minnow that darted just beyond his reach. The next, he was swept away by a thunderous surge that transformed the gentle river into a raging torrent. The peaceful world he knew vanished in seconds, replaced by churning brown water filled with debris. Branches, leaves, and even entire trees ripped from the banks upstream. His panicked eyes caught a glimpse of his family scrambling to safety on the far bank, their desperate calls drowned out by the roar of the flood. His mother stood on her hind legs, reaching toward him with an anguished expression that would haunt him if he survived this ordeal. His father dove repeatedly into the dangerous current, trying to reach him, only to be pushed back by the overwhelming force of the water. His tiny paws fought against the current, but each effort seemed to push him further into the main channel where fallen trees and rocks became deadly obstacles in his path. The techniques that had served him so well in gentle waters were useless against this monstrous force. A sudden impact with a submerged branch sent him tumbling beneath the surface, his lungs burning as he struggled to find air. Water filled his nose and mouth, its taste no longer the familiar sweetness of his home, but a bitter mixture of mud and debris. When he finally broke through to the surface, gasping and coughing, the familiar riverbanks were nowhere to be seen. The flood had carried him far from everything he knew, around bends and through rapids that he had never explored. The sky above had darkened to a threatening gray, and rain began to fall, adding to the chaos of the flood. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by rumbles of thunder that seemed to shake the very earth. The young otter had never felt so small, so insignificant against the raw power of nature unleashed around him. Every landmark he might have recognized was either underwater or left far behind. Each time he managed to swim toward what looked like slower water, a new surge would catch him and send him spinning back into the main current. Exhaustion began to claim him as the relentless current pulled at his small body. His muscles, so nimble and responsive just hours before, now screamed with fatigue. His movements grew weaker, his head dipping below the surface more frequently as strength abandoned him. The cold began to seep into his bones, numbing his paws and making each stroke more difficult than the last. In a final, desperate attempt to survive, he released a series of high-pitched, plaintive cries, a sound so full of fear and innocence that it cut through the chaos of the flood like a knife. It was the call he had used as a newborn to summon his mother, a sound he had almost outgrown but now returned to in his moment of greatest need. The tiny otter's cries echoed across the water, carrying through the rain and wind with surprising clarity. and into the ears of the most dangerous creature he could possibly encounter. As darkness began to close in around the edges of his vision, the last thing he saw was a massive shape moving along the shoreline, golden in the fading light, tracking his progress with predatory focus. The old lion froze at the river's edge. His ears perked toward the strange cries cutting through the roar of the floodwaters. His predator's instincts, dulled but not extinguished, recognized the sound immediately, the distress call of potential prey. His stomach clenched with hunger, a painful reminder of his desperate situation. Here, perhaps, was the easy meal he had been hoping for. He scanned the churning water, his amber eyes still sharp despite his aging body. There, a small, dark shape bobbing in the current, struggling feebly against the river's power. Something tiny and vulnerable. Something dying. The floodwaters had brought him an unexpected gift. A creature too exhausted to flee, too small to fight back. It was the kind of opportunity that rarely presented itself to a predator in his weakened condition. The lion's mind calculated with the cold logic of a lifetime predator. The creature was small, barely a mouthful for a beast his size, hardly worth the effort under normal circumstances. In his prime, he wouldn't have bothered with such insignificant prey, preferring instead to bring down the large herbivores that could feed him for days. Yet his hunger spoke differently now, reminding him that even a small meal might provide the strength needed to hunt something larger tomorrow. And if he didn't act quickly, the river would claim this morsel and leave him with nothing but the gnawing emptiness that had become his constant companion. His muscles tensed as he prepared to wade into the shallows, where the current would likely push the small animal within reach of his massive paws. The water lapped at his feet, cold and unfamiliar to a creature who had spent his life avoiding rivers except to drink. He had never been a strong swimmer. Lions rarely are. But he wouldn't need to swim to catch this prey. Just a quick swipe, a moment of violence, and his hunger would be temporarily satisfied. But as he watched the tiny animal fight for its life, something unexpected stirred within the old predator's heart. The desperate courage of the small creature awoke memories long buried, of his own cubs from years past, of their playful innocence and vulnerability. He remembered how fiercely he had once protected them from hyenas and rival males, how their safety had meant more to him than his own hunger or comfort. He recalled the pride he had felt watching them grow, teaching them to hunt, seeing their first tentative stalks and pounces. Where were they now? Scattered to the winds, forming their own prides, perhaps dead in the merciless cycle of predator and prey that governed the savanna. The small creature in the water released another cry, weaker than before, its strength clearly fading. The sound pierced something deep within the lion's chest, a place he thought had hardened years ago when he was forced from his pride by younger, stronger males. He had been alone so long that he had forgotten what it meant to feel connection to another living thing. Yet here, in this moment of life and death, he felt a strange kinship with the drowning animal. The lion shook his mane in confusion, water droplets flying from the sparse remains of what had once been a magnificent crown. These thoughts were dangerous, a weakness he could not afford in his precarious state. Nature's law was clear. The strong survived by consuming the weak. It was the way of things, the only way he had ever known. Sentiment was a luxury reserved for those with full bellies and secure territories, not for aging predators on the edge of starvation. He thought of all the kills he had made over his long life, the terror in the eyes of zebras as he closed his jaws around their throats, the desperate struggles of wildebeests as they tried to escape his claws, the resigned surrender of old buffalo too weak to fight back. He had never hesitated before, never questioned, never felt anything but the satisfaction of hunger appeased. Yet he hesitated now, caught between the hunger that demanded satisfaction and a strange, unfamiliar feeling that whispered of another choice. The flood waters rushed past, carrying the struggling otter ever closer to where he stood. In moments, the current would bring the small creature directly before him, an offering from the river itself. His stomach growled loudly, an insistent reminder of days without food, of the relentless march toward a death he could feel approaching with each passing hour. The otter's eyes met his across the churning water, dark, frightened eyes that somehow held a spark of the same will to live that had kept the lion fighting long after most of his kind would have succumbed to age and weakness. In that brief moment of connection, the old predator saw something of himself reflected back. A fellow survivor, a kindred spirit in the struggle against forces too powerful to overcome alone. Time seemed to slow as the lion faced his decision: to act as the predator he had always been, or to become something else entirely. The choice before him was impossible, defying everything he understood about survival and the natural order. To follow the hunger that had guided him through decades of hunting, or to listen to this strange new voice speaking from a place he had thought long silenced. The river seemed to hold its breath, the roaring waters momentarily quieting as if nature itself waited to witness his choice. The rain that had been falling steadily began to ease, allowing shafts of late afternoon sunlight to break through the clouds, illuminating the scene in a golden glow that transformed the muddy floodwaters into a shimmering stage. With a deep growl that rumbled from his chest, the aging king of beasts made his decision, one that would forever alter his place in the story of the wild. The growl was not one of aggression or hunger, but something more complex, a declaration of defiance against the very laws that had governed his existence. It was the sound of a creature choosing to be more than what nature had designed him to be, more than a simple predator bound by instinct and need. The choice made, he stepped forward into the flood, his massive paws displacing water as he moved with newfound purpose toward the struggling otter. His eyes, once cold with the calculation of a hunter, now burned with a different fire, the determination of a protector. Whatever happened next would rewrite everything he understood about himself and his place in the world. There would be no going back from this moment, this impossible choice that flew in the face of every natural law. And somehow, despite the hunger that still clawed at his belly, despite the weakness in his aging limbs, despite the uncertainty of what would follow, the old lion felt something he had not experienced in years, a sense of rightness, of purpose beyond mere survival. It was as if, in choosing compassion over instinct, he had discovered a new kind of strength, one that had nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with the capacity to change, even at the end of a long life lived by different rules. The lion's massive paws splashed into the shallows, sending water spraying into the air as he waded deeper into the flood. The cold current pushed against his legs, threatening to sweep even his substantial weight downstream. His eyes never left the tiny otter, now barely keeping its head above water as it drifted toward him. The muddy water swirled around his chest, soaking his mane and chilling his aging bones. But still he pressed forward, driven by an impulse he could neither name nor understand. Every instinct screamed at the lion to wait at the edge, to let the water deliver his prey directly to his waiting jaws. Yet something stronger than instinct drove him forward, into the dangerous waters he had always avoided throughout his life. Lions were not creatures of rivers and lakes. They were masters of the dry savanna, hunters who stalked through grass rather than water. He had always viewed water with suspicion, approaching it only when necessary to quench his thirst. never willingly immersing himself in its unpredictable depths. Now, with each laborious step, he defied the wisdom that had kept him alive for so many seasons. The river's power surprised him. What had looked manageable from the shore proved far more formidable once he was committed to his course. The current pulled at his legs, threatening to unbalance him, while debris carried by the flood struck his flanks with unexpected force. A submerged branch scraped painfully against his underbelly, but he barely registered the hurt. So focused was he on reaching the struggling creature ahead. As the distance closed between them, the otter spotted him, its terrified eyes widening at the sight of the massive predator wading toward it. Its struggles intensified in a final, desperate attempt to escape what surely looked like death approaching. The small creature released another pitiful cry, weaker than before, its strength nearly gone. Its tiny paws churned frantically at the water, but its movements grew increasingly uncoordinated as exhaustion claimed it. The flood had taken everything from the young otter, its family, its home, and soon, it seemed, its life. The lion's footing suddenly vanished as he stepped into a deeper channel, forcing him to swim awkwardly, his powerful legs ill-suited to the motion. Water closed over his back, leaving only his head above the surface. For a terrifying moment, he felt the current begin to take him, to sweep him away, as it had so many other creatures that day. Panic flared in his chest, a sensation he had rarely experienced in a lifetime of being the one who caused fear rather than felt it. With a tremendous effort that sent pain lancing through his aging muscles, he fought his way back to shallower water, refusing to surrender to the river's power. With a powerful lunge that sent pain shooting through his arthritic joints, the lion stretched his neck forward and opened his massive jaws. Those same jaws that had crushed the throats of countless zebras and wildebeests throughout his long life. But instead of clamping down with killing force, his teeth gently closed around the otter's scruff, lifting the tiny animal clear of the water with the same careful precision he had once used to carry his own cubs. The taste of the otter's fur on his tongue awakened the predator within him. His mouth flooded with saliva, and his stomach contracted painfully with hunger. For a heartbeat, the urge to bite down, to end the small creature's life and satisfy his own needs, nearly overwhelmed him. The otter went limp in his grasp, either from exhaustion or the instinctive surrender of prey in a predator's jaws. Water streamed from its sodden fur as the lion carefully turned and fought his way back toward the shore, each step a battle against the current that threatened to sweep them both away. The journey back seemed impossibly long, his strength fading with each laborious movement. Twice he nearly lost his footing on the slippery riverbed, and each time he had to struggle to keep the otter's head above water while regaining his balance. The weight of the small creature, insignificant under normal circumstances, now seemed to grow with each passing moment as his own energy waned. His vision began to narrow, dark spots dancing at the edges as oxygen debt built in his straining muscles. The shore, so tantalizingly close, still remained beyond reach as the current pushed him steadily downstream, away from his intended landing point. With a final surge of determination that drew on reserves he didn't know he possessed, the aging predator lunged toward a fallen tree that extended from the bank into the flood. His claws scrabbled against the slippery bark, finding purchase just long enough to pull himself forward against the current's relentless push. Inch by painful inch, he dragged himself and his tiny burden toward safety. His breath coming in ragged gasps that sent hot pain through his heaving chest. When at last he reached the riverbank, the lion gently placed the otter on dry ground, then collapsed beside it, his chest heaving with exertion. For long moments, neither moved. The great predator and the tiny prey, side by side in a tableau that defied the ancient laws of nature. The lion's sides heaved with each labored breath, his once magnificent coat now plastered against his thin frame, revealing the outline of ribs that spoke of too many days without a successful hunt. Mud caked his paws and legs, and debris from the flood clung to his mane, robbing him of the regal appearance that had once made other creatures tremble at his approach. The otter lay motionless, its small body rising and falling with shallow breaths. Its fur, once sleek and water-resistant, now appeared dull and matted with silt from the river. One of its paws was bent at an unnatural angle. Injured, perhaps, during its violent journey downstream. It looked impossibly small and fragile next to the lion's massive form, a mere morsel that would barely qualify as an appetizer for a predator of his size. The lion watched it with confusion in his eyes, unable to understand his own actions. Hunger still gnawed at his belly, yet he made no move toward the easy meal lying helplessly beside him. The pain of starvation, his constant companion these past weeks, seemed to intensify, as if to punish him for his inexplicable choice. His body demanded that he follow the law that had governed his existence. The strong survive by consuming the weak. It was nature's most fundamental principle, the foundation upon which the entire balance of life depended. And yet, instead of obeying that primal directive, he lowered his great head and did something even more extraordinary. He began to lick the small creature with his rough tongue, cleaning away the river mud and stimulating its circulation, just as he would have done for one of his own cubs. The taste of the otter's fur filled his mouth, but now it awakened memories rather than hunger. Memories of tiny bodies nestled against his side in the safety of a den, of playful cubs tumbling over his paws, of a time when he had been more than just a killer, when he had been a protector and guardian. His tongue, designed to strip meat from bone, now moved with surprising gentleness across the otter's small form, carefully avoiding the injured paw. He cleaned mud from its eyes and ears, removed tangles of debris from its whiskers, and gradually restored some semblance of order to its bedraggled appearance. The repetitive motion soothed him somehow, providing purpose and focus that distracted from his own discomfort and confusion. Under this unexpected ministration, the otter stirred, coughing up river water and trembling with cold and fear. Its eyes opened, meeting the amber gaze of the lion with incomprehension. Predator and prey, locked in a moment that should never have existed, a moment of mercy in a world governed by tooth and claw. The small creature made no attempt to flee, perhaps recognizing that it lacked the strength to escape, or perhaps sensing, on some instinctive level, that the normal rules had been suspended in this strange encounter. The lion paused in his grooming, his great head hovering over the tiny form as their eyes met. In the otter's gaze, he saw not just fear, but a spark of the same fierce will to live that had driven him to continue when so many others of his age had already succumbed to the inevitable decline. That shared determination created an unexpected bridge between them, a connection that transcended their natural roles as hunter and hunted. Around them, the forest had fallen into an unnatural silence, as if the other creatures sensed the extraordinary nature of what was transpiring. Even the birds, usually quick to announce any unusual developments, remained quiet in the branches overhead. The only sounds were the continuing rush of the floodwaters, the soft rasp of the lion's tongue, and the occasional whimper from the otter as it gradually recovered from its ordeal. As the light began to fade from the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, the lion found himself facing yet another decision. Night would bring cooling temperatures that could prove fatal to the small, wet creature beside him. His own body, despite its size, felt the chill settling into his soaked fur. Survival would require warmth, shelter, food, all things that seemed in desperately short supply in this flood-ravaged landscape. And yet, having come this far in defiance of nature's law, he could not bring himself to abandon the small life he had saved. With a deep sigh that seemed to come from his very soul, the lion made another choice that would once have been unthinkable. He carefully shifted his position, curling his massive body around the tiny otter, creating a protective barrier against the evening chill. The warmth of his body would keep the small creature alive through the night, though it did nothing to address his own growing hunger. As darkness fell completely, the old lion rested his head on his paws, his eyes remaining alert despite his exhaustion. He had become a guardian rather than a hunter, a protector rather than a killer. Whatever tomorrow might bring, whatever consequences might follow from his inexplicable choices, he would face them with this new understanding of himself, that even at the end of a long life lived by the harsh laws of nature, he had discovered the capacity for something else entirely, something that defied explanation but felt, in some strange way, like a completion rather than a contradiction of all that he had been before. The stars emerged one by one in the clearing sky, bearing witness to the extraordinary scene below. A mighty predator standing watch over a creature that should have been his prey. Both of them castaways from the normal order, united in their struggle against the indifferent forces that had nearly claimed them both. And in that quiet moment, with the flood waters still rushing past and the night creatures beginning their cautious emergence, something new was born between them. Something for which the natural world had no name, but which would change them both in ways neither could yet imagine. Dawn broke over the flood-ravaged landscape, painting the sky in delicate hues of pink and gold. The lion awoke with a start, momentarily confused by the small, warm weight pressed against his side. Memory returned quickly. The flood, the desperate rescue, his inexplicable decision to save rather than consume the small otter that now slept peacefully nestled against his massive paw. The creature's rhythmic breathing created a gentle counterpoint to his own deeper respirations, an unexpected harmony that somehow soothed his troubled spirit. The waters had receded somewhat during the night, leaving behind a changed world. Debris clung to tree trunks, marking how high the flood had reached. Uprooted bushes lay scattered across what had once been open grassland, while small pools of standing water reflected the brightening sky. The ground was still sodden, squelching beneath any weight. The air carried the earthy scent of mud and displaced vegetation, along with something else, the faint, tantalizing aroma of potential prey somewhere in the distance. The lion's stomach contracted painfully at the smell, a sharp reminder of his increasingly desperate situation. He had not eaten in many days, and yesterday's exertions had depleted what little strength remained in his aging body. The hunger that had been his constant companion now clawed at him with renewed intensity, demanding satisfaction. He needed to hunt, and soon, or he would not survive another day. His once powerful muscles felt weak and unresponsive, and a bone-deep weariness had settled into his frame. Warning signs he recognized from having witnessed the final days of other predators throughout his long life. As if sensing his thoughts, the otter stirred, stretching its small limbs and wincing when it moved its injured paw. Its dark eyes blinked open, immediately finding and focusing on the great predator beside it. For a moment, fear flashed across its features, a natural reaction that the lion had seen countless times in the eyes of his prey. But then, remarkably, the fear subsided, replaced by something the lion had rarely encountered in his long life: trust. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. A softening around the eyes, a relaxation of the small body's tense posture, an absence of the trembling that typically preceded a desperate attempt to flee. The otter made a soft, chittering sound, then attempted to stand. Its injured paw buckled immediately, sending it tumbling back against the lion's foreleg. The small creature looked up at him, its expression almost accusatory, as if demanding to know why he had saved it, only to leave it injured and helpless. There was a spark of defiance in its gaze that reminded the lion of himself in his younger days, the refusal to accept defeat, the determination to overcome any obstacle. The lion rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that was neither growl nor purr, but something in between. A sound he had once used to communicate with his cubs when they were being particularly troublesome. It carried neither threat nor aggression, but rather a complex mix of reassurance and mild admonishment. The otter responded with another chitter, then began grooming itself, seemingly unconcerned about the massive predator watching its every move. Its small paws worked methodically through its fur, attempting to restore order to its appearance despite the handicap of its injury. Hunger gnawed at the lion's belly, demanding attention. The scent of potential prey had grown stronger as the morning warmed, carrying on the gentle breeze that rustled through the leaves above. His predator's instincts urged him to move, to track, to hunt, to follow the ancient rhythm that had sustained him throughout his life. He needed to hunt, but he could not leave the vulnerable otter alone and unprotected. Predators would be drawn to its weakness, and in its injured state, it would have no chance of escape. Jackals, hyenas, even large birds of prey would make quick work of such easy pickings. The sensible choice, the natural choice, would be to end his strange experiment in mercy. To consume the small creature and gain what little nourishment it could provide before seeking larger prey. It would be a return to the order he had always known, the law that had governed his existence since he first learned to hunt at his mother's side. The weak perished so that the strong might continue. It was nature's way, neither cruel nor kind, simply necessary. Instead, the lion found himself gently picking up the otter by its scruff once more, ignoring its indignant squeaks as he carried it away from the riverbank and into the shelter of a nearby thicket. The dense undergrowth, partially flattened by the flood, but still providing adequate cover, would hide the small creature from searching eyes. There, he created a small hollow with his paws, scraping away debris and pressing down the softer vegetation to form a crude but comfortable nest. He placed the otter inside where it would be hidden from casual observation, surrounded by greenery that would provide both concealment and shade as the day grew warmer. The otter turned in a circle, testing its new accommodation with obvious skepticism. It pawed at the arrangement, rearranging some of the materials to its own specifications before settling down, with a look that somehow managed to convey both gratitude and annoyance. The message in the lion's amber eyes was clear as he met the otter's gaze one final time before turning away. "Stay. Wait. I will return." Whether such complex communication was possible between such different species, he could not know. But something in the otter's responsive gaze suggested understanding, or at least acceptance of the situation. Whether the small creature truly understood, he could not know. But as he padded silently away in search of prey, the lion felt a strange new sensation, a sense of responsibility that extended beyond himself, a purpose that gave new urgency to his hunt. For the first time in many seasons, he was providing not just for himself, but for another. The weight of this responsibility settled uncomfortably across his shoulders, yet it also kindled something he had thought extinguished, a fierce determination that had once made him the most feared hunter on the savannah. He paused at the edge of the thicket, looking back one last time. The otter had already disappeared from view, concealed within the hollow he had created. Good. Perhaps it would remain safely hidden until he returned. With that hope to sustain him, the old predator turned his attention to the hunt, drawing in deep breaths to analyze the scents carried on the morning air. His nostrils flared as he sorted through the complex tapestry of smells: water, mud, vegetation, and there, tantalizingly faint but unmistakable, the distinctive odor of potential prey. The hunt was difficult in the flood-altered terrain. Traditional game trails had been washed away, familiar landmarks submerged or displaced. The ground itself betrayed him, what appeared to be solid footing often giving way to mud that sucked at his paws and slowed his already compromised mobility. Traditional prey animals were scattered and wary, their usual patterns disrupted by the disaster. Many had fled to higher ground ahead of the rising waters, leaving this area temporarily depleted of the larger herbivores that would normally sustain a predator of his size. The lion's weakened condition slowed him further, his once explosive charge now reduced to a labored lope that gave his targets ample warning. The magnificent speed that had once allowed him to overtake fleeing prey was but a memory, replaced by a halting gait that betrayed the arthritis in his joints and the diminished power of his once mighty muscles. His breath came in harsh pants even after minimal exertion, his lungs no longer able to supply sufficient oxygen to his straining body. Twice he attempted to bring down young antelope, and twice he failed, his lungs burning and legs trembling with exhaustion as he watched his prey bound away. The first, a juvenile impala separated from its herd, had spotted him too soon, alerted perhaps by his labored breathing or the uncharacteristic clumsiness of his approach. The second, a small gazelle, he had managed to get within striking distance of, only to have his leap fall short, his claws barely grazing its hindquarters before it accelerated away, leaving him sprawled in the mud, sides heaving with exertion. Each failure depleted not just his physical strength, but also his confidence, that essential belief in his own abilities that had once made him such a formidable hunter. Doubt crept in with each labored breath, with each tremor in muscles that had once been iron-hard and utterly reliable. Was he destined to starve after all, despite his desperate efforts? And what of the small creature waiting for his return? Had he doomed them both with his inexplicable moment of mercy? By midday, desperation had driven him to consider prey he would normally have ignored. Smaller creatures that offered minimal reward for the effort of catching them. His hunger had become a constant, screaming presence, impossible to ignore. The proud predator, who had once disdained anything smaller than a wildebeest, now found himself stalking rodents that darted between patches of cover, watching the movements of ground-dwelling birds with predatory intensity. When he spotted a large monitor lizard sunning itself on a fallen log, the lion seized the opportunity, pouncing with what little strength remained. The reptile, nearly as long as his foreleg but a fraction of his weight, proved more formidable than expected. It fought fiercely, its powerful tail lashing at his face and its jaws snapping dangerously close to his eyes. Its scales provided surprising protection against his claws, while its sinuous body twisted with remarkable strength, nearly escaping his grasp more than once during the brief but intense struggle. But in the end, the outcome was inevitable. The lion's experience and sheer size, even in his diminished state, proved decisive. With a final powerful bite, he ended the lizard's resistance. It was not much of a meal for a creature his size, but it was something. The meat was tough and stringy, nothing like the rich flesh of the ungulates he preferred. But it quieted the worst of his hunger pangs. As he consumed his modest prize, The lion found himself calculating how long such meager nourishment might sustain him. A day, perhaps 2 if he remained inactive. Far from sufficient for a full recovery of his strength, but perhaps enough to keep starvation at bay while he sought more substantial prey. Hunger partially satisfied, the lion found himself doing something unprecedented, tearing off the choicest portion of his kill and carrying it back toward the thicket where he had left the otter. The behavior made no sense from any perspective he had ever known. Predators did not share their kills with other species, especially not with creatures that would naturally be their prey. Even within his own kind, sharing was limited to pride members, family units bound by blood and mutual interest. The idea of deliberately dividing his already insufficient meal with an unrelated creature from an entirely different species was so foreign, so contrary to every instinct and experience, that he could not begin to rationalize his actions. Yet he found himself unable to do otherwise, driven by the same inexplicable impulse that had led him to wade into the floodwaters the previous day. The piece of meat dangled from his jaws as he made his way back through the altered landscape, navigating around newly formed pools and over piles of debris left behind by the receding waters. The journey seemed longer on the return, his energy flagging despite the small amount of nourishment he had consumed. Several times he had to pause, resting his aging body before continuing toward the thicket that had become, in the space of less than a day, a destination that pulled at him with surprising strength. When he returned to the thicket, he found the hollow empty, the otter gone. The nest of vegetation remained, slightly rearranged but clearly abandoned, with no sign of the small creature he had left there hours before. A momentary surge of something like disappointment washed through him, followed quickly by relief. The small creature had obviously recovered enough to move on its own, to return to its natural life. Perhaps its injury had been less severe than it appeared, or perhaps the resilience of youth had allowed a swift recovery. Whatever the reason, the otter had chosen to leave, to resume its normal existence in the world of streams and riverbanks where it belonged. The strange interlude was over, the natural order restored. He could now focus solely on his own survival, as he had always done before. The piece of lizard meat he had carried so carefully now seemed like evidence of his own foolishness, a testament to a momentary madness brought on perhaps by hunger or the disorientation of age. He dropped it on the ground, suddenly aware of how precious even this small amount of nourishment might prove in the days ahead. Waste was a luxury he could not afford. He had just settled down to rest his aching limbs when a familiar chittering sound reached his ears. Alert instantly, he raised his head, ears swiveling to locate the source of the noise. The otter appeared at the edge of the thicket, dragging something in its mouth, a large fish, still flopping weakly as the small predator struggled to manage its prize. The silver scales caught the afternoon sunlight as the fish thrashed in a futile attempt to escape, its substantial size making it an awkward burden for the much smaller otter. The lion watched in astonishment as the otter approached him without fear, its gait awkward due to its injured paw, but determined nonetheless. It came directly to where he lay, depositing the fish at his paws before retreating a short distance, its bright eyes fixed on him expectantly. The fish continued to flop sporadically, its gills working desperately as it slowly suffocated in the air. The fish was fresh, substantial, a far more significant meal than the lizard meat he had brought back for the otter. Somehow, despite its injury, the small creature had managed to hunt successfully in one of the pools left behind by the receding flood. The lion had seen otters fishing before, from a distance, their sleek bodies diving beneath the surface, emerging triumphant with wriggling prey clasped in their jaws. It was a skill he had always observed with detached interest, irrelevant to his own hunting methods. Now, he found himself oddly impressed by the small predator's success, especially given its handicap. And now, incomprehensibly, it had brought its kill to share with him. The concept was so foreign, so unexpected, that the lion found himself momentarily frozen, unable to reconcile what he was seeing with anything in his previous experience. Predators did not share across species lines. They did not bring gifts of food to creatures that could easily devour them. They did not form alliances with natural enemies. Yet here was the evidence before his eyes, flopping weakly on the ground between them. In that moment, something shifted fundamentally in the lion's understanding of the world. The natural order he had known all his life. The strong devouring the weak, each creature fighting alone for its survival, suddenly seemed incomplete, a partial truth rather than the whole. The rigid categories that had defined his existence, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, victor and victim, blurred and dissolved, revealing possibilities he had never imagined during his long life. Here, in this small clearing, predator and prey had transcended their ordained roles to create something new. A partnership, an alliance, a bond that defied classification. It was as if they had stepped outside the great wheel of life and death that governed the natural world, finding a space between the spokes where different rules applied, where cooperation might prove more valuable than competition, where mercy could yield unexpected rewards. As the lion carefully placed his portion of lizard meat before the otter and accepted the gift of fish in return, he felt the last vestiges of his old self falling away. The proud, solitary hunter who had lived by fang and claw, who had measured his worth by the power of his roar and the fear it instilled in others. That lion was gone, replaced by a creature he barely recognized. He was no longer simply a predator, no longer merely a lion. He had become something else, something more, a being capable of compassion, of connection, of choice beyond the dictates of instinct and hunger. The otter approached the lizard meat cautiously, sniffing it with obvious curiosity. Its whiskers twitched as it examined this unfamiliar offering, circling it several times before taking an experimental bite. The taste seemed to surprise it. Its head jerked back, and it made a sound that almost resembled a sneeze. But hunger quickly overcame its initial hesitation, and it began to eat with increasing enthusiasm, tearing off small pieces with its sharp teeth and deft paws. Meanwhile, the lion turned his attention to the fish, ending its suffering with a quick bite before beginning to eat. The flesh was different from his usual fare, moister with a distinctive flavor that was neither unpleasant nor entirely appealing. It provided nourishment, however, and for that he was grateful. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware that such meals might be few and far between in the days ahead. The otter, seeming satisfied with this exchange, settled beside him to eat its share of the meal, its small body leaning trustingly against his massive paw. The contrast between them could not have been more pronounced. The tiny, sleek water dweller and the massive, battle-scarred king of the savannah, sharing a meal as if such an arrangement were the most natural thing in the world. Together, the most unlikely of companions shared their feast as the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves above, casting dappled shadows across their mismatched forms. When they had finished eating, the otter began grooming itself meticulously, cleaning every trace of food from its whiskers and fur. The lion watched this ritual with quiet fascination, reminded of his own pride members and their similar habits after a successful hunt. Without conscious thought, he began his own abbreviated version of post-meal grooming, his rough tongue cleaning his paws and muzzle with practiced efficiency. As the day waned toward evening, the lion found himself oddly content despite the uncertainty of his situation. His hunger was temporarily satisfied. He had shelter of sorts in the thicket, and, most surprisingly, he had company. The crushing solitude that had been his constant companion since being driven from his pride had lifted, replaced by the small, warm presence of the otter. It was not the companionship he would have chosen or expected, but he found himself grateful for it nonetheless. The otter, apparently deciding that enough time had been spent on grooming, began exploring their shared space with lively curiosity. Despite its injury, it managed to move with considerable agility, investigating every corner of the thicket, sniffing at unfamiliar plants, and occasionally returning to the lion as if to report its findings. Its energy seemed boundless compared to the lion's weary stillness, a reminder of the vast difference in their ages and conditions. As darkness approached, the otter finally exhausted itself, returning to curl up against the lion's side as it had the previous night. Its small body radiated surprising warmth, a living ember pressed against his flank. The lion shifted slightly to accommodate his tiny companion, creating a protective curve with his body that sheltered the otter from the cooling evening breeze. And for the first time in many seasons, the old lion felt the heavy solitude that had been his constant companion begin to lift, replaced by something he had thought lost forever. A sense of belonging, of purpose beyond mere survival. The emptiness that had hollowed him out from within, leaving him a mere shadow of his former self, began to fill with something new and unexpected. A connection that defied all logic, yet felt more real than anything he had experienced since the loss of his pride. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, he would face them not alone, but with this improbable ally at his side. The thought brought an unfamiliar sense of peace as he drifted toward sleep, his breathing synchronizing with the gentle rise and fall of the otter's smaller form. In this moment of quiet companionship, the differences between them, predator and prey, land and water, massive and minute, seemed insignificant compared to what they shared. The will to survive, the capacity for adaptation, and the unexpected ability to transcend the boundaries that had once defined their existence. The natural world might never understand or accept what had transpired between them. The rigid laws that governed the endless dance of hunter and hunted made no allowance for such anomalies, such deviations from the established order. But as the lion watched the small otter sleeping peacefully beside him, trusting its life to a creature that should, by all natural law, have been its death, he found that he no longer cared for the approval of a system that had cast him aside when his strength began to fade. He had found a different path, one that offered not just survival, but something he had never thought to seek in his long and bloody life: redemption. In saving the otter, in choosing mercy over hunger, compassion over instinct, he had discovered a part of himself he never knew existed. And in that discovery lay the possibility that his final days might hold more meaning, more purpose, than all the years of hunting and killing that had preceded them. As night settled fully over the flood-ravaged land, the stars emerged one by one, bearing silent witness to the unlikely pair sheltered beneath the tangled branches. The lion's eyes grew heavy, his awareness dimming as sleep approached. His last conscious thought was not of hunger or danger or the uncertain future, but of the small creature beside him and the strange journey they had begun together. A journey that had already taken them far beyond the boundaries of the world they had known, into uncharted territory where new possibilities awaited with the dawn. The next morning arrived with a symphony of birdsong, nature's rhythm reasserting itself after the chaos of the flood. The lion woke to find the otter already active, moving with noticeably improved mobility around their shared sanctuary. The small creature's injured paw, while still favored, now bore some weight as it navigated the uneven ground with growing confidence. The lion stretched his massive frame, wincing at the familiar pain in his joints. Age had not been kind to his body, wearing away at once mighty muscles and stiffening limbs that had once moved with fluid grace. Yet something felt different this morning, a subtle but undeniable change in his spirit. The crushing fatalism that had shadowed him since his exile had receded, replaced by a fragile but persistent sense of purpose. Their shared meal the previous day had temporarily quieted his hunger, but now it returned with renewed intensity. Hunting would be necessary again today, for both of them. The question of how to proceed loomed large in his mind. Should they separate to seek food according to their own natures? Or continue this strange partnership that defied all natural law? The otter made the decision for them. It approached the lion with purposeful steps, chittering softly as if communicating some urgent plan. Then, with a final glance that somehow conveyed both invitation and impatience, it moved toward the edge of the thicket, clearly expecting him to follow. Curiosity overcoming his natural inclination to hunt alone, the lion rose and padded after his small companion. The otter led him through the recovering landscape, past debris-strewn clearings and around standing pools left by the receding waters. Its path seemed random at first, but gradually the lion recognized the strategy. They were moving toward a series of interconnected pools where fish might have been trapped by the falling water levels. At the largest of these pools, the otter paused, turning to the lion with what could only be described as expectation in its bright eyes. The message seemed clear. They would hunt together, combining their different skills in pursuit of shared sustenance. What followed was unlike anything the lion had experienced in his long life. The otter slipped into the water with barely a ripple, its sleek body transformed from awkward land dweller to graceful aquatic predator. It dove and surfaced, herding fish with remarkable precision toward the shallows where the lion waited. When the panicked fish darted into the shallows, the lion's massive paws struck with surprising accuracy, flipping the silvery prey onto the shore where neither fish nor otter could reclaim them. Their unusual cooperation yielded results that neither could have achieved alone. By midday, a small pile of fish lay on the bank, more than enough to satisfy both hunters. As they ate their fill, side by side in the warm sunlight, the lion marveled at the efficiency of their partnership. The otter's speed and agility in water complemented his own power and precision, creating a hunting strategy that compensated for his aging limitations. Their meal complete, they were preparing to return to their thicket when a new scent reached the lion's nostrils, a smell that sent a jolt of alarm through his aging body. Hyenas. A pack of them, moving toward the pools, drawn perhaps by the smell of fish or the scent of the lion himself. Hyenas were opportunists, scavengers by preference, but capable hunters when necessary. To a healthy pride male in his prime, they represented little threat, but to an aging, solitary lion, weakened by hunger and injury, they posed a deadly danger. And to the small otter, they would bring certain death. The lion's first instinct was to flee, to seek safety, in distance and concealment. But the otter, unaware of the approaching threat, continued to play at the water's edge, oblivious to the danger. In that moment, the lion made another choice that defied his nature. Instead of saving himself, he positioned his body between the approaching hyenas and his vulnerable companion. When the hyena pack emerged from the undergrowth, they hesitated at the sight of the lion. Despite his diminished condition, he remained an imposing figure, his mane framing a face that had struck terror into generations of prey and competitor alike. He summoned what strength remained in his failing body, drawing himself up to his full height, and released a roar that belied his weakened state. A thunderous declaration of defiance and warning. The hyenas paused, their collective courage wavering in the face of this unexpected resistance. They had anticipated easy prey, not a confrontation with the traditional lord of the savannah, however diminished he might be. Their leader, a battle-scarred female with calculating eyes, assessed the situation with cold precision, weighing the potential meal against the risk of injury. Behind him, the lion sensed rather than saw the otter retreat to the safety of deeper water, ready to disappear beneath the surface at the first sign of attack. Good. At least one of them might escape if the confrontation turned violent. For long moments, predator faced predators across the contested ground, neither side willing to initiate the battle that would inevitably follow any aggressive move. The lion knew he could not win a prolonged fight. His strength would fail long before the hyenas tired. His only hope lay in convincing them that the price of victory would be too high, that easier prey could be found elsewhere. The standoff might have continued indefinitely had fate not intervened in the form of distant thunder. The sound of hooves approaching, a herd of some kind on the move, perhaps displaced by the flood and seeking new grazing grounds. The hyena leader's ears swiveled toward the sound, her attention divided between the immediate confrontation and the promise of potentially easier prey. After a final, hate-filled glare at the lion, she made her decision, turning away with a series of yipping calls that summoned her pack to follow. Within moments, they had disappeared into the undergrowth, moving toward the approaching herd and away from the defiant lion and his hidden companion. Only when the last hyena had vanished from sight did the lion allow his posture to relax, his body sagging with exhaustion from the sustained tension. The roar and display of strength had depleted what little energy he had recovered from their meal, leaving him trembling with fatigue. The otter surfaced cautiously, swimming to the shore with wary movements. It approached the lion slowly, as if sensing his exhaustion, then pressed its small body against his foreleg in a gesture that seemed to contain both gratitude and concern. As they made their way back to the relative safety of their thicket, moving slowly to accommodate the lion's depleted strength, a new understanding solidified between them. They had become more than reluctant companions thrown together by circumstance. They were now allies, bound by mutual protection and shared survival in a world that had little place for either an aging predator or a displaced river dweller. That night, as stars appeared in the clearing sky, the lion watched his small companion sleeping peacefully beside him. The day's events had changed something fundamental in their relationship, cementing a bond that had begun with an inexplicable act of mercy and evolved into something neither could have anticipated. In the quiet darkness, the old lion acknowledged a truth he had been reluctant to face. He was dying. Not immediately, perhaps not even soon, but the decline had begun and would not be reversed. His strength would continue to fade, his hunting skills diminish further, until eventually hunger or predators or simple exhaustion would claim him. But for the first time since recognizing his own mortality, the thought brought neither fear nor despair. Instead, he felt a strange peace settle over him, an acceptance that had eluded him until now. Whatever time remained to him would have purpose and meaning beyond mere survival. He would protect the small creature that had somehow become essential to his final days, and perhaps, in doing so, redeem something of his fierce and bloody life. With that resolution warming his heart, the lion allowed sleep to claim him. His massive body curled protectively around the otter as the night deepened around their unlikely sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but they would face them together. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted, now united in defiance of the very laws that had once defined their separate existences.